Hi, this is Botterill and William Robinson, my colleague from Waterstone Insolvency, and we want to do a little socially distanced video for you today about the insolvency process and specifically liquidations, and what are some of the frequently asked questions that we are asked when people are meeting with us and they're considering potentially putting their company into liquidation. One of the questions that they ask is, can I be a director of another company if I place this company into liquidation? And well, why don't you run us through the answer to that one?
Yeah, so probably the most common question we receive when a shareholder liquidates their company is, will it affect their ability to be a director or a shareholder of another company? And strictly speaking, no, it will not restrict your ability to be a director or a shareholder of another company unless the company's registrar suspects that you have a track record of negligent directorship, and then they may choose to prohibit your directorship, but that happens very, very infrequently.
So if they see a pattern of behavior, they can take a step to essentially ban you for a period of time if they deem that you're a risk to the business community, I guess. And you're right, that is quite a rare thing to happen.
Yes. Another commonly asked question we do receive at an insolvency firm is, will the liquidation or receivership or administration affect their credit score? Do you mind sharing the answers, Adam?
Yeah, sure. It's something that people are really conscious of, their credit history and will it affect them getting finance in the future? And this answer is kind of, it depends. The liquidation will show up on a credit check of an individual because they link into the company's registrar and they draw public information out. So it will show up potentially on a credit check that you have a company that's been liquidated, and it really will depend on, I guess, the length of time since the liquidation, how maybe big the liquidation was, how much money was outstanding. I think that could all factor into the credit scores. So I think it can, but it's not something that would go on forever and can be fixed over time.
Another frequently asked question that we do receive in an insolvency firm is, will the director be bankrupt automatically as a result of the liquidation?
So yeah, that is something that often people will confuse the company's insolvency with their personal insolvency, and they may think that because the company's gone under that they'll be automatically bankrupt. But that's not the case. The company is a separate entity to them personally, and if the company's wound up, they're not automatically bankrupt. Now, if they have personal guarantees or other debts, people may pursue them and try and bankrupt them that way, but they're definitely not one and the same. So no, you're not going to be bankrupted if you place your company by virtue of the liquidation. Another question we get quite often is, what happens next? So people are, I guess, anxious about the process and what we do. So, Will, why don't you just run us through briefly the steps that we take when we are appointed as liquidators and what we kind of do from there?
So once the company is placed into liquidation, the liquidator resumes the agency of the company. So the director loses his control over the affairs of the company, and then the liquidator will determine if there are any existing contracts, whether they are worth completing or whether he will disclaim the contracts, and then the liquidator will analyze the affairs of the company and begin to try and firstly assess whether there are any recoverable assets into the company. But in terms of a director, once the company is placed into liquidation, the director loses his control over what happens next.
Practically speaking, once the company is placed into liquidation, the liquidator essentially becomes the director. So they're the person that is in control of the company, and they'll manage the winding up and any of the residual kind of issues that are there. I guess from a practical point of view, the company will be listed as in liquidation on the company's register, so it will show up. The liquidator will then do a statutory report, which is public, and that's posted on the company's office. We'll also contact the trading banks and find out, what bank accounts there are, and they'll be frozen from the date of liquidation. We'll also do a high level and kind of, look at the business and are there staff, are there assets, what is to be done. We'll make an action plan from there to maximize recovery of the assets and try and get a good strategy to efficiently wind everything up. It's something that, those all sound very normal to us, but we know that not everyone deals with this regularly, and so there'll be a bit of mystery around, the mechanics of what happens once the company is put into liquidation. If there are creditors and outstanding suppliers that are owed funds, we become the point of contact for them, and it's kind of, ceases to be the director as well. So that's something that we handle from an administration side. Another question people ask us is how long will the liquidation take? And I'm guessing here the answer is it depends.
Yes.
But why don't you give us just a bit of elaboration on that question, how we can help people to get an understanding of the timeframes?
So the duration of a liquidation is very dependent on the nature of the operation that was running. So it is very difficult at the date of appointment to estimate the duration of the liquidation, because the liquidator will not know what he is dealing immediately once the company is placed into liquidation. So the liquidator would need to determine what needs to be realized in the liquidation and what other current operations of the company. It is unlikely any liquidation would last less than 6 months. And I would say the usual duration of a liquidation is between 12 and 24 months. This is to make sure that any issues that do arise after the initial appointment can be covered.
The liquidation timeframe is very dependent on the complexity of the company, what's there, what assets, but also on the potential of any legal claims or actions. Because if there's anything legal and it has to go through the courts, that can take a lot longer. A simple liquidation with just a few assets to sell and things to wind up, that will normally take a shorter period of time. So there's no real kind of fixed time frame that we can give. Often it is very dependent on how big the company was and what there is to do. Let's see here. Another question that we get is, should I wait and see what happens? And I guess I'll jump in on this one. And the answer, again, very much depends. We wouldn't recommend that directors continue to trade and incur new debts, because they can open themselves up to personal liability if the company's not in a good state and they continue on. There are risks that start to appear. So, liquidator could investigate them for, for reckless trading and any other claims like that. So, really, it's about taking swift action, getting good advice early, and not letting it drag out. That would be, I guess, my biggest stress on that.
Building on that, if your company is experiencing financial stress, it is prudent to seek a professional advice immediately, whether that be from a lawyer or an accountant. It does not necessarily have to be an insolvency practitioner, but acting swiftly and promptly can potentially save a lot of consequences down the line.
Is the ID going to put me in jail? That's one of the questions that does crop up, especially with a large IRD liability. What's some general kind of answers around this?
So yeah, that's a very frequent question we get from directors who have racked up a large liability to the revenue department. And basically it depends on what your debt is comprised of. So whether that be not paying income tax, not paying GST, or not paying your PAYE obligations for staff members. The Inland Revenue has the most severe consequences for directors who don't pay PAYE. That seems to be the categorization of tax which the Inland Revenue Department cares about the most. So chances of the Inland Revenue Department approaching you is high. But if your tax liability is made up of unpaid GST and unpaid income tax, it will be a lot lower. However, it is really up to the discretion of the Inland Revenue Department and who the case officer on at the time is that will determine whether the IRD approaches you.
So if you can come up with funds that satisfy the IRD, that could be an option that would reduce, the likelihood of there being any further repercussions on that.
So if a company leases a premises for their operations, they do normally ask what happens to the landlord and my lease obligation, because leases are usually signed over multiple year periods. And the answer is that the debt for the lease contract falls within the liquidation. The only chance where this could impact you personally is if you do sign a personal guarantee and guarantee the company's lease. This is quite common, as landlords do seek extra security for their investment. So unless you have signed a personal guarantee on your lease for your premises, the liability will fall within the liquidation.
And we'll hear one of the last questions people have for us is, how much will the liquidation cost and how does this get paid for? Do you want to just give us like a brief rundown on this question?
So how much the liquidation will cost is dependent on how complex the liquidation is. It is very difficult to estimate this at the date of appointment, because obviously the liquidator wouldn't have investigated the company thoroughly at that stage. The liquidation costs is comprised of time billing from the liquidator. So all the time spent from by the liquidator and his staff on that liquidation will make up an invoice in which the liquidator can charge against the liquidation. And I
think it's just, I guess, kind of at a high level for people to know that we can't really give a fixed price unless it's quite a simple job that we can foresee what's going to happen. We charge on a time and material basis for our fee. So essentially we record our time and we have hourly rates, essentially like an accountant or a lawyer. And we will then get paid out of the assets of the company. So if we recover funds, then we will, draw from those funds to pay our fees. And once our liquidation is completed, then we can determine what's left in terms of a distribution, how much we can pay the creditors. Often we will ask for a fee indemnity as well, which is really just to essentially guarantee a minimum fee. So if we don't see there being any realizable asset, it's whatever, 5-10 grand, to say that the shareholder will cover a minimum fee for us. All right. That's really, I think, a really good introduction email for people. And I think just good to address those frequently asked questions that we get in our initial meetings with people. And again, I think I recognize that it's something that we deal with all the time, but for people who are in financial stress, they're not used to this world. And, these are all questions that are quite daunting. So yeah, thanks for watching our FAQ video. And if you have any other questions, let us know. And reach out if you're also looking at options for your company, or you'd like some general insolvency advice. Really happy to have a chat. We'll Orion go over those with you. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.